Welcome back to Explain America. This is your host, Kyle Becker. Well, a rogue judge has been shot down yet again. He overstepped his bounds and tried to act like the President of the United States and was put back in his place. And this ruling just goes to show once again that Trump is beating his opponents in court over and over again whenever it reaches the appellate level. So these rogue judges, they are acting just as obstructionists. Unfortunately for this judge, he was batted down. But before we get into this story, please like, share, and comment at Explain America. Join us. We appreciate your support for common sense journalism. Now, the Supreme Court has a lot on its plate nowadays. We've gone into a lot of the bigger cases, such as the birthright citizenship case. And of course, ahead of us, we have the Voting Rights Act case. And those two should have a massive influence on the fate of this nation. But the Supreme Court quietly issued a decision on its shadow docket that has a lot of the left-wing unions scrambling. They are really upset because it reinforces Trump's authority to decide what policies are implemented in the executive branch. After all, Trump was the one who was elected to be president, not any of these judges, not the heads of these teachers' unions, not any of these activist groups. No, it was President Trump who won the election decisively, not just the popular vote, but also every major swing state. So a major shift in policy was desired by a majority of voters in the last election. That is the bottom line, whether the lamestream media likes it or not. Now, the Supreme Court has essentially rubber-stamped Trump's policy of ending DEI in the federal government. And the Supreme Court on Friday afternoon put a hold on an order by a federal judge in Massachusetts that would have required the shuttered, for the most part, Department of Education to reinstate more than $65 million in grants that had terminated last February because they funded programs that included diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. But of course, that is all just a catchphrase that has nothing to do with what it's all about, and that is discrimination against other Americans. Now, in an unsigned 3-page opinion, a majority of the court explained that the government likely would not be able to get the funds back once they were dispersed. Moreover, the majority added that the recipients of the funds would not be permanently harmed if the funds are withheld while the litigation continues. Now, the vote was 5-4, and the Chief Justice, John Roberts, indicated that he would have denied the government's request. So, can you guess who dissented? Well, first of all, we have Justice Elena Kagan, who dissented, calling the court's ruling a mistake. And our favorite Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, in an opinion joined by Justice Sonia Sotomayor, also dissented, writing that it was, quote, beyond puzzling that a majority of the justices conceive of the government's application as an emergency, unquote. Well, going to someone that just says, I don't understand over and over and over again, that's not a huge surprise. Well, at issue in the case are 2 grant programs intended to address a nationwide shortage of teachers. The Department of Education canceled all but 5 of the 109 grants after reviews found objectionable diversity and equity training material in the recipient programs, aka propaganda and brainwashing. So 8 states, led by California, filed a lawsuit in federal court in Massachusetts in early March. They argued that universities and nonprofits in their states had received grants through the programs, and that the Department of Education had violated the federal law governing administrative agencies when it ended those grants. A federal district judge issued the temporary order that required the government to reinstate the grants. I mean, this is cuckoo. And that it terminated in the states bringing the lawsuit. And that was U.S. District Judge Myung Jun, who prohibited the government from implementing other terminations in those states. Kind of obvious. You can just tell by the judges' names nowadays how they're going to rule for the most part. Well, here's the thing with all of this. It's a good thing that the Department of Education has been closed. I mean, Ronald Reagan wanted it shuttered permanently, and Trump has accomplished nearly all of that quietly just by shutting everything down. And he deserves some credit for that win for the American people because, quite frankly, it has turned into a giant slush fund that has nothing to do with improving education of students in this country, which is the litmus test of whether a policy is successful or not. Now, a recent analysis said red states spend $14,000 per pupil, and blue states spend $21,000 per pupil. And yet, the test scores are virtually the same. So can you guess the biggest overpayers during this analysis? Well, D.C. has an extra 15,000 a student. New York has 12,000 a student. Vermont has an extra 10,000 a student. New Jersey an extra 10,000, and Connecticut an extra 8,000 student. Again, zero results difference, period. And so according to the analysis, 19 best value states are 19 for 19 Trump voting states. So it turns out that red state voters care about how their money is being spent, while blue states, well, the money disappears into a black hole that goes to teachers' unions and activist groups and NGOs and allies of the Democratic Party. And it's a massive fraud scheme, just like we saw with Minnesota and California and New York and New Jersey and Maryland, all the rest of them. It's a giant fraud scheme in most of these states wherever Democrats gain single-party control. So that's just something that should be apparently obvious to anyone in this country. So if you work for a living and you care about how your taxpayer dollars are spent, do not elect Democrats to run your state. It is virtually suicidal on your budget and for any kind of efficiency when it comes to education or any other aspect of the economy. So weigh in with your thoughts about this story. What do you think about the Supreme Court ruling and Trump once again being proved to be actually the president of the United States? I mean, you could blow me away with a feather. It seems like the president is actually the president. Wow, what a Supreme Court ruling. Well, thanks again for watching, and please like, share, and comment. We always appreciate you at Explain America.
So I guess I am looking at your position in this case, and it boils down to requiring us to do at least these two things. One is believe that the framers were not importing the common law rule and understanding of birthright citizenship. And the second is to believe that what they were doing was departing from that common law rule in the way that you suggest. That is, they were seeking to have this turn on domicile. I think you have a number of hurdles to accomplish those two things. One of which, I think, is that when we look at this court's case law, and no one, I think, has mentioned Schooner's Exchange, but it appears that that was an 1812 case in which it seems as though the court had already accepted at the time of the ratification of the 14th Amendment that the allegiance that you were talking about was the English common law rule. That, in other words, allegiance meant that you are covered by the laws of the jurisdiction, that you can rely on that jurisdiction's protection. That's what allegiance meant. Now, you're saying today, no, allegiance meant something about loyalty or that kind of idea. But if the Supreme Court had, prior to the 14th Amendment, established that allegiance meant the common law definition, I think your first hurdle is to help us understand why we would believe that when the 14th Amendment was ratified, the framers weren't just incorporating what we had previously said it meant.
Page 572 of the congressional record directly addresses this. They say the concept of temporary and local allegiance from the Schooner Exchange is what is meant by, or temporary and local jurisdiction from the Schooner Exchange is what is meant by the word jurisdiction in the 14th Amendment. Senator Trumbull says, I thought about saying owing allegiance, but again, quote, there's a sort of allegiance from persons temporarily resident in the United States whom we have no right to make citizens. So he expressly and consciously rejected reliance on Schooner.
What do we do